The Day After 1983 wasn't just a TV movie. It was a weapon that changed history. The pyrotechnic mushroom clouds caused a real nuclear panic in Kansas. President Reagan watched it and completely reversed his military policy.
They would prefer superiority.
And ABC set up crisis hotlines because viewers were having panic attacks.
I witnessed nuclear destruction.
These are 14 facts about the most terrifying film ever broadcast, including the 60 minutes of deleted horror too devastating to air and the studio battle over whether to show hope in the ending. 1. A real-world panic. When the production crew set off massive pyrotechnic explosions to create mushroom cloud effects in Lawrence, Kansas, they made a catastrophic communication error. They didn't warn the surrounding communities about what they were doing. Local residents, already living with constant Cold War anxiety about nuclear annihilation, saw enormous columns of smoke rising on the horizon. They immediately assumed the worst. Police stations and emergency services were flooded with frantic calls. People genuinely believed a nearby Air Force base had been attacked. That nuclear war had actually begun. The panic spread through several towns before authorities could get the situation under control and explain it was just a film production, a perfect preview of what the actual movie would do to the national psyche. It blurred the line between fiction and reality so effectively that people couldn't tell the difference. 2. The crisis hotlines. ABC executives were genuinely terrified about the psychological impact The Day After would have on the American public. They did something unprecedented in television history. They set up toll-free crisis hotlines staffed by counselors during and after the broadcast. The network expected complaints and anger. What they got was far more disturbing. Thousands of people called in, not to criticize the film, but because they were having genuine panic attacks about the possibility of nuclear war. Counselors fielded calls from parents whose children were inconsolable, from adults who couldn't sleep, from people who were convinced the world was going to end and didn't know how to cope with that terror. The crisis lines stayed operational for days after the broadcast. Because the trauma didn't fade, it intensified as people processed what they'd seen. 3. Reagan's change of heart. This is the fact that matters most. President Ronald Reagan watched a private advance screening of The Day After at Camp David in October 1983, a month before it aired publicly. In his personal diary entry from that night, he wrote that the film left him greatly depressed and that it was very effective and left me deeply disturbed. This wasn't just casual viewing for Reagan. Historians now cite The Day After as one of the major catalysts that shifted his nuclear policy. After seeing the film, Reagan began moving away from his aggressive Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative rhetoric. He started pursuing serious arms control negotiations with the Soviet Union. The film is directly credited with influencing his decision to eventually sign the INF Treaty, which eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons. A television movie literally changed the course of the Cold War by forcing the most powerful man in the world to confront what his policies could actually lead to. 4. The 60 minutes of deleted horror. The original director's cut of The Day After was nearly 3 hours long. It contained significantly more graphic depictions of radiation sickness, mass death, and complete social collapse. Bodies rotting in the streets, people dying slowly from radiation poisoning, children covered in burns, the complete breakdown of civilization into savage chaos. A BC and the advertisers forced director Nicholas Meyer to cut almost an entire hour of this footage. They were terrified that showing the true extent of nuclear horror would make the film literally unwatchable and destroy any commercial value. Meyer fought back, but ultimately lost. The version that aired was already the most disturbing thing American television had ever broadcast. But it was still heavily sanitized compared to what Meyer had originally created. The deleted footage has never been officially released. Some believe it's been deliberately suppressed because it's simply too devastating to show. 5. The White House visit days before the scheduled broadcast, the Reagan White House sent an official representative to ABC's headquarters. They demanded an advance screening of the film. They were terrified the day after would spark a massive nuclear freeze movement that would undermine the government's entire military strategy. Make it politically impossible to maintain their hardline stance against the Soviet Union. The White House representative watched the film and immediately tried to pressure ABC into airing a pro-nuclear deterrence debate segment after the credits. To balance what they saw as dangerous anti-military propaganda, ABC refused. But the network did agree to air a special viewpoint episode with conservative commentators, including George Will, to provide political counter-argument. The White House's panic proved they understood exactly how powerful the film would be. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a political weapon. 6. Advertising suicide. Almost no major American brands wanted to advertise during the day after. Companies like General Mills, Sears, and dozens of other blue-chip advertisers pulled their commercials at the last minute. They were terrified their products would be associated with the end of the world and nuclear holocaust. No corporation wanted their breakfast cereal commercial to air immediately after footage of children dying from radiation sickness. ABC ended up losing millions of dollars in potential advertising revenue. They had to sell the remaining commercial slots for a fraction of their normal primetime rates to smaller companies desperate for exposure. The financial loss was catastrophic, but ABC went ahead with the broadcast anyway, because they believed the film was too important not to show. One of the few times in television history where a network chose public service over profit. 7. Real amputees as extras. To make the post-blast hospital scenes look horrifyingly realistic without relying on expensive prosthetics, the production hired real-life amputees to play victims of the nuclear explosion. The makeup team covered them with shredded latex and charcoal to simulate flash-burned skin, creating wounds and injuries that looked absolutely convincing because they were built on actual physical trauma. The effect was so disturbing that multiple actors and crew members had to leave the set. They were becoming physically ill from working in such a gruesome environment. A controversial decision that raised ethical questions about exploiting people's real disabilities for shock value. But it also gave those scenes an authenticity that fake prosthetics could never achieve. You're not looking at movie makeup. You're looking at real human bodies that have been through trauma, and your brain recognizes that at a subconscious level. 8. The Invisible Soldiers. The U.S. Department of Defense completely refused to cooperate with the production. They hated the script because it portrayed the American military as powerless to prevent nuclear war or protect civilians from the aftermath. That contradicted their entire public narrative about nuclear preparedness and civil defense. Without Pentagon support, the production couldn't access real military equipment, bases, or personnel. They had to rent civilian versions of military gear and fake the Army's presence using actors and improvised costumes. This actually made the military look even more disorganized, desperate, and ineffective than if they'd had official cooperation. The soldiers in the film look like they're barely holding together, exactly the opposite of what the Pentagon wanted to project. By refusing to help, the military accidentally made themselves look worse. 9. Stolen stock footage. The terrifying missile launch sequences weren't filmed specifically for the day after. Because the military refused to provide any assistance, the editors had to scour government archives for real footage of Minuteman missile tests that had been declassified. The problem was that this archival footage was grainy, low quality, and often damaged. It had been filmed decades earlier on inferior film stock. The post-production team had to use optical printing techniques to clean up and enhance the images so they wouldn't look like cheap documentary inserts. The irony is that using real missile launch footage made those sequences more terrifying than special effects ever could. You're watching actual nuclear weapons being prepared and fired. Even though the context is different, your brain knows those missiles are real and could kill millions of people. 10. The Lawrence symbolism director Nicholas Meyer chose Lawrence, Kansas, as the setting for a very specific symbolic reason. It's the approximate geographic center of the continental United States. Meyer wanted to make an unmistakable point. If nuclear war happened, There would be no safe middle ground, no protected heartland that could survive while the coasts were destroyed. If the very center of America was hit and turned into a radioactive wasteland, then the entire nation would die. No escaping to rural safety. No rebuilding from untouched territories. Lawrence represented every small American town. By destroying it, the film destroyed the illusion that nuclear war could be survived or won. If the heart dies, the whole body dies. 11. The ghost town set. After filming the nuclear blast sequence, the crew had to transform Lawrence, Kansas, into a post-apocalyptic wasteland for the second half of the film. Instead of building elaborate sets or using special effects, they covered entire city blocks with tons of gray ash, debris, and imported dead trees to simulate the aftermath of nuclear fire. The actors playing survivors were given strict instructions not to wash their hair or shave for weeks before filming those scenes, creating a genuinely unwashed, desperate appearance that makeup alone couldn't replicate. The cumulative effect of real dirt, real exhaustion, and real physical discomfort made the performances feel authentic in ways that clean actors in dirty makeup never could. The cast looked genuinely traumatized and broken because they spent weeks living in filth and sleeping rough on a set that looked and smelled like death. 12. Predicting nuclear winter. The Day After was one of the first major media projects to visualize and popularize the nuclear winter theory. The scientific hypothesis that smoke and ash from burning cities would block out the sun, causing global temperatures to plummet and killing crops worldwide, even in areas that weren't directly hit. While scientists were still actively debating whether this theory was accurate or alarmist, Nicholas Meyer decided to include it, because it represented the worst-case scenario. The movie brought this terrifying concept into the living rooms of 100 million Americans, transforming an academic debate into visceral nightmare fuel that shaped public understanding of nuclear war for an entire generation. The film didn't just show the immediate effects of nuclear weapons, it showed how the entire planet could die slowly from starvation and cold, even if most of it was never directly attacked. 13. Both sides called it propaganda. The Day After caused a massive diplomatic incident that exposed the absurd contradictions of Cold War propaganda. Soviet state media initially condemned the film as American propaganda, designed to make the USSR look like the aggressor, even though the film deliberately avoids showing which side launches first. At the same time, American conservatives attacked it as Soviet propaganda, designed to make Americans too scared and demoralized to maintain military strength. The film was so effective at terrifying both superpowers that something extraordinary happened. It was eventually shown on Soviet television, becoming one of the rare cases where a Western doomsday film was used as a peace advocacy tool by both sides of the Iron Curtain. The Soviets used it to argue that American aggression could destroy the world. Americans used it to argue that Soviet aggression could destroy the world. Everyone was right and everyone was wrong, which was exactly Meyer's point. Nuclear war has no winners. 14. The no-hope ending. There was a brutal behind-the-scenes battle over the final moments of The Day After. BC executives and advertisers desperately wanted some kind of hopeful ending. A single green plant growing in the radioactive ash. A voiceover suggesting humanity would eventually rebuild and survive. Director Nicholas Meyer flatly refused. He argued that a hopeful nuclear war movie was not just dishonest, but actively dangerous. He insisted on the bleak, silent ending, with the on-screen disclaimer stating that the actual effects of nuclear war would be much, much worse than what the film depicted. Meyer believed that giving audiences hope would undermine the entire message. Nuclear war isn't survivable. It isn't winnable. We need to be terrified enough to prevent it from ever happening. This refusal to provide catharsis or comfort is exactly what made The Day After the most watched and most hated educational tool of the entire 20th century. It forced people to sit with their fear instead of releasing it. So do you think a movie could still change world history today? Or are we too desensitized to care? The The day after proved that fiction can shape reality when it forces people to confront truths they've been avoiding. If you're one of them, let me know in the comments. If you want more deep dives into the films that defined the Cold War, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.